that trauma aspect of being a vet. Oh, we are live. So, how do you like to be referred to? Miss Simone? Simone?
Simone is fine. Simone is
Simone is
fine.
fine.
Yes.
Um, this is going to be a hot topic. That's why I chose the theme I did. We are all immigrants. We should all be our brother's keepers. In this
Okay.
day and time, that is a hot topic issue for some folks. I know I've offended some folks in my other aspects of work because they're kind of the mega crowd.
Okay.
So basically, what I do is this: I give a quote. Your quote was so freaking amazing. I'm staying with it. Building a human library of immigrant stories to humanize, not dehumanize, but humanize, amplify the contributions to immigrants in the United States and beyond. What led to you getting involved in this area all those many years ago? And probably my only question of the whole thing.
Right, right. So we've been doing our podcast, The Immigrant Experience in America, for
So
now
now
three
follow on
years.
YouTube.
Right. Thank you for doing that for 3 years. And it came out of my very own journey being an immigrant American. I've been here for over 2 decades now.
Hmm.
And I still very much identify as immigrant American because I was never really I wasn't born here.
Hmm.
And so even after 20 plus years, there's a part of my life where I was born and raised that is still very part of who I am. And so I can't just erase that and just, focus on life here. That is a part of who I have become over the year. It does
Hmm.
still um, lend to my decisions, the way I eat, and so forth. So
Hmm.
this whole podcast came out of my very own journey of just getting mixed messages about, whether I was welcome or not welcome on any given day. There was just mixed messages depending on who you were dealing with.
Hmm.
And I was going through some issues of culture shock, which is where you leave one place and you're new to another setting. College students who are going into their first year of college go through culture shock. International
Hmm.
students leaving their country, studying in another country, experience culture shock. International professionals, etc. So I was going through culture shock and not realizing the impact on me. And so I was like, when I started hearing all the negative narrative about, like, just immigrants in general, I was like, who are they talking about? Because I know since I've arrived, all I've done is studied and worked and tried to do my best and stay out of trouble and add to the American marketplace. And I know
Hmm.
a lot of people around me who do the same. So I was like, I need to create a platform that really shares all of the positive influence and impact that the people I know were having, that I feel
Hmm.
that I was making to where I
Hmm.
now live. And and through the conversations over 180 episodes later, we've talked to so many people from around the world about their transition, how it's going, how they've added to the places where they now live. So there we go.
Hmm. That that's a really interesting way to phrase what you phrased because I've heard, well, I'm one of these gig workers, so I'm around a lot of people. I'm a full-time gig worker now, and
What do you mean gig
sometimes I
worker?
find
Like you have a little gig here, another side gig,
yeah,
multiple
all that
gigs?
kind of thing, like because basically I stopped working. I stopped working for a full-time regular employer on February 7th of this year for the first time. So I do some of this, I do some of that. The podcasting is currently the non-paying aspect of it. But I've been in a podcaster. Life is about more than living. It's entering its ninth year now. It's
Wow,
audio, and
congratulations.
now, thank you. And this is since I've joined, started utilizing StreamYard. This is the first time it's being put out there, audio and video at the same time, and live. So this is a new experience for me bringing, because all my previous guests were all audio. We pre-record whatever time zone. I'll upload it. Now we're going live. So I'm looking over here at my things here, I'm not commenting or anything or whatever. Um, with that being said, the immigrant experience I encountered again in my different gig work types of gig work, which I don't go up to up here a lot of people in other countries, and what's so interesting, um, this current political climate we are in, I have encountered one particular young lady from China who, according to what she shared with me, she's really concerned about how it's going to affect her as a student. And we've seen some of the deportations, legal or illegal, however they want to phrase it. We constantly see, not seen, we constantly see. I saw some more this morning, the dehumanizing of people. And like you were saying, you were like, what are they really saying? Uh, I'm 62 years old, and I look back in hindsight on the Reagan years, the Nixon Watergate stuff as a kid, the verbiage I've heard, and the research I've done. Yes, the people who are immigrants and the negativity of it. And now I'm getting to see that these people are just ordinary people like I am. I actually I was blessed to be around those who helped me to understand people are just people. But it seems like now it's going the other way for some folks, as we see in the country talk, South, that is primarily. That's why I wanted you up here to share your experience, to share your insights as how we can, those of us who have a heart, can get to share with others, how other people who say, well, they're illegals or they're this or they're that or this is that. That my personal spiel is, I'm a man of color. I'm only protected by the 14th Amendment. I'm one step away from being in their position. They will ever overturn that amendment because that's the one controls the naturalization and everything.
Mhm.
Um, so that's the point I approach people at. It's like anyone who is non-color, white, European, you get caught in that thing. So I cannot look down on my brother. I am my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper. But I want to know more about how people such as yourself are working in this arena, and just because you have done from the heart, help everyone that has a listening ear to see past the craziness, the lies, that stuff. Because you've lived that experience in a different way than I would, way I would never live it. I'm getting
Right.
kind of somber now because it's rarely I have a one-on-one. I got a one-on-one with someone who's lived that experience for up to at
Right.
least 30 to 40 minutes.
Right. Right. Well, it differs from day to day, from season to
Right?
season. It all depends on where you're living.
Mm-hmm.
So I've lived in, how do I say, in Missouri. That's where my
Ooh,
family
yeah,
was,
yeah,
cold, and that's where my
yeah.
family settled down. And then when it was my dad's turn, so my aunt came first. She came on a work opportunity and was able to get her stay through that. And then my dad had to wait 12 years to get here.
Wow.
So he waited his turn, was in line, and then 12 years. And so that's how my family came, was after 12
Right.
years we could arrive. And so we came and we moved to Kansas City because that's where we had a support system. Aunts,
Mm-hmm.
uncles, and family were there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in that area for some time. And then my master's program took me to the Washington, D.C. area, and then lived in Maryland, Virginia on and off, and
Mm-hmm.
then to Philadelphia, the tri state area there,
Mm-hmm.
Philly, New Jersey, New York, and then settled in the southeastern part. And I'll leave it there just by southeastern because I'm just trying to make sure I protect myself and my family. And
I understand, but let me throw this out there at you. What in your journey, what were some of the contrasts in the different regions you lived in as far as interactions?
it was. When I was in the Midwest, I was mostly around family. There's a lot of
Mhm,
us. My dad is one of 11 and my
mhm,
mom is one of 12. So we've always just been a very close-knit family. We've never really gone to friends' houses. They've come to our
mhm.
house because we
Right,
were always cooking. We had, birthday parties, big
right.
dinners at Thanksgiving or
Mhm,
holidays, and we would
mhm,
invite our friends over. So we've never really had to venture out, and so when we made friends at school or at university underground, we would bring them home. And so it
okay.
was very soft for me, very warm
Mhm,
and friendly because I was mostly around family in the
right.
Missouri area. It changed when I went to DC because DC is a very
That's great. Yeah.
it's
Mhm,
a very complex sort of culture in that area. It's very
mhm,
transient. People are in and out. You don't really get to go deep with relationships because
mhm,
people are just coming in. They focus on work. It's about who you know, what your connections are, what sort of network you have. And so people aren't really necessarily interested in going deep and building those sorts of relationships with you. And so
mhm,
quickly I had to learn how to navigate that type of setting. And
mhm,
plus it's very international, so you're interacting with people from overseas. There's a lot of consulates, embassies in the area, lots of international professionals. And so I'm not quite sure what I would say is the very distinct DC culture because there's a mix of so many people in that
mhm.
area.
And
Um, Go ahead.
I'm listening. This is fire truck
Right.
going by.
Right. So, I think I was thrust in this very international space where I found myself like eating, didn't realize how much of an international palate I had because I was trying so many different foods for the
Mhm,
same time, going salsa dancing, hanging out with my colleagues or friends in university. And so for the first time being away from home, like literally out of that bubble that I was raised in, I
mhm,
moved away. And so it was just really a young person experiencing life. And then, over time, yeah, I started realizing there was so much complexity to the culture that I wasn't really getting it. I wasn't picking up on the social cues. I wasn't, that I was drained by just hanging out with friends because there were so many mixed messages in that space. And so it just kind of led me into starting to research, asking questions, and yeah, but DC is a lovely area. I would move back to Maryland any
mhm,
day. There's just so much beauty of culture and food and that the dynamism of the people who are there. So I love that area. Quite a different culture in the Northeast than there is in the South. People are just
mhm.
different in the South. There, a lot of people here may not have even moved from the South in a lot of states. They're born
Yeah,
and
myself.
raised and they've never gone
Yeah,
anywhere, So
right.
that what they know is the culture that they were raised in. And so I've been on a learning journey discovering different parts of the South, and went to, I guess, Montgomery, Alabama, where they
Oh,
had
you were deep
history
south.
there.
Yeah, you were really deep south. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, but we visited because we wanted to learn about the history. We know some folks who moved down there. And we visited them and heard the history and saw the place where they had the bus that was caught on fire, the spot where
Mhm,
it actually started. And so, we kind of really immersed ourselves into like, the history of the place and really tried to understand. But it's a different culture. The Northeast is quite different from the Southeast. And so, but
mhm,
when you go to the Atlanta metro area, there's a lot of diversity as well. So there's a lot of
mhm,
international culture here, lots of farm markets that has so much different types of
mhm,
food, lots of different restaurants. So it's a blend of so many things. And on any given day, you can meet somebody who's embracing. And another day, you might meet someone who's just very closed and not interested in interacting, or might give you a weird look. You know what I'm saying? As soon as I open my mouth, I might not necessarily have a thick Caribbean accent anymore, but people still kind of pick up my vibe that
mhm,
I'm not really native to the US. And so
mhm.
it depends on who you come across. And so yeah, always a mixed, embraced, push
Well,
away, embrace, push away.
yeah.
It's
Right.
just
Well, the
like,
South
okay.
is definitely different. That's why I said the deep South. Being born and reared here in North Carolina, um, I lived. North Carolina has basically three regions. I've lived a lot of my life in two of those three regions. Uh, And where I grew up at, it, I'm gonna bring some of my background, some of my stuff into this. People still get along, as we say here. However, I'm on at the age I am now, and there's others like me who recall going to what was known as colored people bathroom. People are like, that was a long time ago. I'm like, no, it wasn't. I'm 62. I remember when integration happened in my
Wow.
hometown. My hometown held out and fought it to the point that the state of North Carolina came. When people now talk school choice, they're talking a new version of what was already been happening back then. Because before North Carolina as a state followed the federal law, they created freedom schools, freedom of choice schools,
Wow.
which allowed Christian schools, as they call it, to pop up. So the white people could send their white kids to those schools. Then the next phase, they created another level. And then the third phase, they followed the federal law, which allowed me to be like first grade, maybe kindergarten, to be in one of the first integrated classes in the early. So that being said, I mean, I always ask people when they about the stories of the South and their encounters with the South. Is around those time periods, the Great Migration, as I learned as an adult, happened when people from the South went to New York, went to Pennsylvania. They traveled
Mhm.
up there, and then we're stuck here not having those resources. I grew up knowing what I know, and then as an adult, not just as an adult, I always loved books and embracing learning. And podcasts allowed me to have people from all over the world on it to share their story, their journeys. And whereas I'm, whereas what you share with me, I've connected a lot of my own Black history through books to the DC area. I visited once and probably visit a lot more. Um, but just to hear your story, it touched my heart because once this is all over, your story helped me to relate to other people when I'm out doing maybe my book promo or whatever I'm doing. Because I, my personal thought is this, and I'm kind of heavy of heart as I think about it, is the theme of itself. We are all our brothers and sisters keepers. Everyone in this country, regardless how the political landscape looks or projects that other people to be, we are all immigrants here, descendants of immigrants, some more recent than others. To tear down those walls of hate through education, through knowledge, through insight, through programs such as your YouTube channel, which I now can share with people. I'm like, you got questions, you're wondering. I'm not the person to speak to. Watch her content, learn from her stories, learn from what she projects out there through her project. Because I guess I'm kind of emotional because I've seen the level of hate
Hmm.
towards immigrants. I've lived it as an American, the level of hate. Uh,
Right.
it took my oldest son going to New York to be called the N word for the first time because he grew up in a shielded environment. A long time ago, family life was different. Community, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, we interacted with others in the community, but you knew who was who. But when he moved to Queens, New York, and had his first own place in Queens, and he was in a good part of Queens, we got to walk the street and leave the doors open. He was walking down the sidewalk and someone called him the N word. He had never been called the N word his entire life growing up here in North Carolina.
Hmm.
So I'm bringing that into this conversation because we are. I, I don't want to take over talking. This is not my podcast. This is your
No,
time.
no, but it's
But
enlightening. It's enlightening for me to hear.
it's
Because I
like
think we need to
we we
talk.
we share common experience, especially when you travel to the South, especially with the climate we're in right now. And it's more open, it's more blatant. And if someone hears an accent, you never know what's going to trigger them. Uh, we have the accent within the accent here in the South. So different regions of the state I'll go to, like, where are you from? I had a client who was selling solar panels in Alabama, and his the farmer he was marketing the product to, he shared with me how that farmer's 14-year-old son asked him did he do business with N people.
What people?
N
The
people.
N
I'm not
word.
using the word. Yeah,
Oh, the N word people. Oh, wow.
and that was like less than 7 years ago.
Wow.
and which goes to the other side. Immigrants, skin tone, whatever. Uh, what is one way in particular? Because this is totally unrehearsed. I give a little script. I don't give a lot of script. I don't like scripted dialogue. I want. Um, what can you, or what are you willing to share with reference to hitting hatred, confronting hatred and indifference with love and compassion?
Mm. That's deep. I mean, it's a very,
I
this
know it's
whole,
personal on different people, but just to confront
right,
that, yeah, on an individual level. Let's say it's just one on one.
right. And it's not easy. I can tell you it's not easy because
Hmm.
I was raised in a bubble most of my life around
Hmm.
family, and a small countryside town is where my family owns property in Jamaica, right? So
Hmm.
we know everybody. Less than 250 people live in that community, so very
Hmm.
small. My
Hmm.
grandmother would say, "What, take this to so and so," and she wouldn't worry. I would walk by
Right.
myself
Hmm.
a mile down the road to go bring this to a neighbor and come right back. And no
Hmm.
worry that anything. So that's how close we were. We saw people, dark skin, light skin, pale people
Right. Hmm.
owning property. I grew up in that sort of community. They came
Hmm.
to our property to play. If we had a funeral, everybody comes
Hmm.
out. If we
Yeah.
have an event, everybody. So, and I think in the Southeast, I've realized that sort of sense of community is actually down here as well.
It's here, but it's not. How can I say? It's here, but it's more so in the smaller towns. Because when you say what you just said, for a time period, I lived in my previous life in a small town of 500 people. My sons were real small, so they could go to the laundromat at their small age to dry clothes. They could go to the store by themselves. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone kind of looked out for everyone. And and our next door neighbor, he eventually shared with us his backstory, which was he didn't know black people could be so nice,
Wow.
and because he was to the point where he was to the point where he got to the point where it was all over. Our sons could go over his yard and play with the dog. He talked about the changes he had seen, and yeah, because he never had anyone literally less than 5 feet away from him living that close to him, yard to yard. And uh, this was a man in his 80s at the time. I'm going back to the early 90s, but I'm bringing it back to what you're saying. When you have that for us, with people, a lot of people in the South, not just myself, not just my story. Even my hometown now, 2,000 people. Everybody knows everybody. You have 4 stoplights. you, and if you don't know you, whose son are you? Whose daughter are you?
Exactly.
That kind of thing. And you know those who have those tendencies, but you learn to get along because it's your community.
Right.
So, but then I get here in a more metropolitan area, in my places of employment I've had been in, I've seen the other stuff, uh,
Yes, right.
heard other
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, so that's the sort of setting that I was raised in. And so then I
mhm,
came to the US, and My aunts and uncles all lived 10, 15 minutes apart. We all came together just as we were back home and opened our
Hmm.
homes just the same
Yeah.
to our
Oh,
friends and family and so forth, because that's the type of family we are. But I quickly learned that the American culture wasn't like that. And people were not, you have to make an appointment to go to people's homes. You can't just show up. It's a
now that's
cultural
something I had to deal
difference.
with as an adult because growing up in a small town, you didn't have to do that. You went over,
Yeah.
knocked on the door, and you went in.
Exactly, exactly. So I had to learn that cultural difference, and it's this whole issue. It's I can say it's very hard. I was very naive because I my first instinct wasn't to jump to when was rude to me that it was a racial issue because I wasn't raised with that concept.
Hmm.
It was as I came to the US and I started learning, oh, okay, so this is my skin tone and what does that mean here? All of a sudden this was a concept in my mind and I needed to read and ask and listen to people and learn about the new culture and space I was living in and how I need to be careful where I'm going because I might be
Hmm.
harmed or might not be welcomed based on how I
Hmm.
look phenotypically, right? So it was a whole journey that I had to go on to educate myself. And a lot of immigrants have to do that. A lot of times it might seem that we might be oblivious to your experience, but it's because we really literally don't know. We were raised in
Hmm.
completely different settings. And so
Yeah.
it's not easy. I think at first I was oblivious. If somebody was rude, I'll just go on my day and I'll just say, oh, that's just a rude person. And I'll
Hmm.
brush it off and keep going. But I think over time, I realized that the microaggressions, you know, it started getting in, like, it started hitting, and you realize you're not your bubbly, happy self anymore. It started
Hmm.
waning away at your personality. We in Jamaica, we walk around and everybody speaks. They say good morning, they say good afternoon. Even if they don't know you, they walk into a grocery store and they're saying good morning or how are you or whatever. And that is a regular thing. And I had to learn that not everybody here is going to respond or speak to you. People
And
will
that,
look you stone in the face and hear you say good morning, and they would not respond. And that was so confusing to me. I had to adapt. And over time, I've become this person that literally don't speak unless somebody speaks to me
mhm,
because you don't know the type of response you're going to get. And that can be hard.
exactly. Yeah, because like I said, uh, moving from a small town to a larger city here in North Carolina, um, that was a challenge. It's not a challenge just for me. I'm sure it's a challenge for other people as well. Because again, you're from even from Jamaica, small rural towns in the South are still fairly that same way for the most part. Um, so when coming to an area where you just look and smile at someone and throw your hand up and they're like, huh? What you there for? Or hold the door for a lady. What are you doing that for? I'm grown. Or
Yes.
so I think that's where I like as far as the theme, not the theme, the name of my podcast, life is about more than living. Because for life to truly be about more than living, for any of us, it just can't be. It's got to be what you're saying. It's got to be what I'm piggybacking off of what you're saying. That we all are sharing a common experience at some level, even though society is is changing and people are changing. We're still on the same page of being human at some level. No, you may not speak to everyone, but a smile speaks volumes when you don't feel like smiling sometimes. And then different regions have different cultures, different things. I get it. Oh God, there's so much. Some in the oh, I'm looking at the content. So one of my big topic, one of the talking points I bring in almost every episode is mental health because I am a trauma survivor, uh, childhood trauma survivor. You mentioned how different cultural changes affect you. How does that play? How's that played in your mental well-being? If you don't mind sharing a little bit, and
Right.
and in line with the work that you do with other immigrants.
Right. It's a big deal. I'm telling you, the research out there says that culture shock can lead to symptoms of culture shock range from mild depression to fatal self-harm.
Wow.
And I've heard of cases. I heard of one student who was at Howard University, and the pressure of um, I don't know all the details or personal details, but apparently he ended up harming himself fatally, right?
Wow.
And then I've heard about somebody recently also told me about some other refugee who couldn't adapt and handle the changes of cultural adjustment in the new country that they were brought in as a refugee, and they ended up harming themselves fatally. And so this is serious business. People are struggling mentally, but because of the narrative surrounding the whole immigrant, right, the narrative, I
Hmm.
think a lot of people feel like they have to stay in the shadows. They can't really speak up and seek the help they need.
Hmm.
And so people suffer in silence. And a lot of people struggle with the fact that, when you were in your birth country, or there are typically collectivist cultures for a
Hmm.
lot of people. You have a community of support around you, and now you come into a country like for example, the US, um, where it's very individualistic.
Hmm.
Everybody's all for themselves.
Hmm.
And you no longer have that support group. You no longer have that auntie or uncle who is looking out for you,
Hmm.
a soft place to land. It can be a very harsh environment for people. And think about it, for people who legally enter the US, this
Hmm.
can be a very harsh experience because of the huge
Hmm.
adjustment challenge that they're going through.
Hmm.
So for people who do that in the dark end of it, like illegally,
Hmm.
can you imagine how much more challenging that could
Hmm.
be? And I can't speak to those people because I haven't really interviewed them, because I can imagine, it's something I try not to touch. It's a very political
Okay,
issue.
right, right.
So
That's why I'm
many
kind of
issues.
phrasing it the way I am, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
it's a very sensitive issue, and I don't really want to touch it because I know there are laws in the in the US, and it's very sensitive, so I stay away from that. But for I talk about legal immigration, and for people who enter the US illegally,
okay.
what is the experience that you then are having once you get here and you're legal? Everybody just slump all of us into one basket. Nobody ask any questions. And I know it's
Mm-hmm.
very sensitive. You can't ask somebody, are you legal or illegal? But all of us get lumped into this one basket.
Hmm.
And I suppose a lot of ethnic groups get, in the US, there's this whole racial definition, like blacks are placed in one group, whites in one group. And
Hmm.
within those groups, there people think differently. You hear people say, blacks, we're not all monolithic. We don't all think the same. We don't all like the same thing. We don't all
Hmm.
behave the same thing. There are French speaking blacks, English
Hmm.
speaking blacks, Spanish speaking blacks,
Hmm.
Portuguese speaking blacks, and people from the continental African continent. I mean, the continent is so diverse. There are so many languages spoken on that
Hmm.
continent. People would be surprised just to take a visit. And so we're not monolithic. And so it's interesting that we all get just painted with this broad brush
Hmm.
of like negative experience, and when I know underneath that we are adding a lot of value to the marketplace and otherwise. I mean,
Hmm.
some of the work that a lot of immigrants do, a lot of people don't want to do it for the pay that they're going
No,
to
they
be
would not.
paid
They would
for.
not do it for the pay. They would not do it for the pay. To
Exactly.
be
And
honest with you,
so
they would not do it. They're doing a lot of immigrants are doing the job that African Americans once did, and we will not do it for the pay anymore. Now I'll speak on that from that political side of it. I will also address what you mentioned because about within the different ethnicities. Um, because I'm a very outspoken person when I feel it's a safe space to be outspoken in. Sometimes I don't always know the safe space, but when someone say, "Well, all those," I will say it. You don't have to say it. All those Mexicans. I'm like everyone that speaks Spanish is not from Mexico.
right,
You,
exactly.
you, everyone. I said you're putting everybody in a bracket like. And primarily, I'm saying it to my own people of color, like they once did us. They were like all of us are from Africa. Well, the slavers brought us from different places around the world, not just Africa. So we don't even know our true heritage unless you're asking questions of grandma or digging deeper into your own research. So how can we cluster everyone else together of a language because of their language when we ourselves don't know our true heritage. And to put everyone in the same bucket is what they're doing to all of us because they don't. I say when I say they, I don't like using the word they. When the United States government started taking a census and declass, and I'm just giving a historical background. You may know more about this than I do. Around World War II was the time period when the Europeans started getting separated into what they call the white race, so to speak, legally in the census. The original slave hunters were Irish, who they made sheriffs in the United States. The sheriff and police force came from the Irish, who got elevated above the other whites to be slave hunters, who now formed our police departments and things around the country, historically speaking.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they so just like in around the period of World War II, the census, the United States, before they started taking a census, sort of categorized who was who. So that some people who speak Spanish, Hispanic, now has been listed on older censuses as being white. So you speak Spanish, but you need to be elevated according to the government once you elevate it. Then along came the Rainbow Coalition with Jesse Jackson, who popularized the phrase African American. And so that got added to the census and replaced the words colored, Negro, and black. On my birth
Oh,
certificate, it says colored on my birth certificate.
wow. Okay. I didn't realize
So
that was Jesse Jackson's movement who actually
that,
kind
that
of.
that that was one of his selling points. Yeah, African American. So yeah, and I lived through that in high school. Um, so all being said, now with the new census being developed, coming up for upcoming census, the verbiage is going to change again because all, but that's when I go back to one of my things I believe firmly in, and I spoke in my book about briefly in one of my poems. We're all the same when you get down to it. Where we're from makes us better in a community. And you can be in a small community, but to learn about others instead of clustering everybody together, you never grow, you never understand, you never compassion. And I can be a very hard person because I got some stuff in my head that I remember it like, yeah, but on the other side of the coin, we're more open and more welcoming. That's what I'm trying to say. Oh, you okay? Because I just remember to take mine, but me. And I don't want to keep going on and on like this because I can get lost in it and have a whole podcast by myself. uh, I'm looking over at your outline. We mentioned touch on mental health, spirituality, maintaining your love with over 40,000 denominations in this country. One spirituality that I have learned is rooted often in one's upbringing. And in the immigrant experience, how does that, as far as help your journey, if you don't mind sharing about the spiritual aspect of your journey?
Oh, spiritual aspect to my journey.
Yeah, and your interaction
My
as an immigrant.
husband. Yeah, so my husband actually just took our daughter to meet up with a swim coach, and they're trying
Mhm.
to find each other. So that's why she's calling me.
Well, if you need to
Um,
go, we're good. I don't want to
no, no,
hold
no, we're
hold them.
good. No, they knew I had this interview. I'm just gonna share. I should have connected them by phone. Three seven
Hmm.
eight zero 873.
Hmm. But yeah, this has been a journey,
Right. So spiritual journey.
and we'll wrap it up after that because I
Right.
got to go
It's
back to
been a
work.
bit. It's been a bit confusing because, in the Caribbean, we're presented with religion in a certain way. And I think
Hmm.
it's presented to like young people in a very innocent way. And I think as
Hmm.
you get older, you start realizing that it's way more complex than that,
Hmm.
right? And particularly in the US, when there's so many different things socially that is at play that you realize are impacting churches and what we get taught and what
Hmm.
perspective from the Bible and how it's presented to you, it becomes very complex. So as I've
Hmm.
gotten older, it's like my journey has evolved. Let's put it that way,
Okay.
right? I was raised My family isn't religious, I'll say that, but I was always, there was a pastor on our street who picked us up and brought us to church. And so that's how I got exposed to Sunday school and things like that. And have been in the church for a number of years, even when my family wasn't really religious.
Hmm.
And still go to church, you know, and we're raising our
Hmm.
daughter in the Christian church as
Hmm.
such, because that's our experience in the Caribbean. Has
Hmm.
been our experience here in the
Hmm.
U.S. But I have realized that religion is it's a very complex issue,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's not just showing up at church every on Sundays and so forth. And you just realize how it gets intertwined. Religion and politics at times gets
Yeah.
intertwined, and how they impact policies and impact people and so forth. So I leave it at
Hmm.
that. It's a very complex issue, and I'm always interested to learn from people, how do they experience religion coming from other countries when they arrive in the US? Like, what is presented to you? What's your experience when you go to a place of worship? How do you
Hmm.
experience other people who quote unquote call themselves religious? And so it's an interesting thing. But what has been your experience, you know, from North Carolina in the South?
Well, I have ran the gauntlet to the point that sometimes people say I'm not even a Christian because I question a lot more than I did when I was younger. Small town church background, grew up, spent a large part of my adult life as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, as conservative as you can get, I think. Then I jumped on the evangelical bandwagon. And when I jumped on the evangelical bandwagon is when I started digging into my Black history. Uh, And the book called The Black History of the White House.
Ooh,
It,
that's interesting. Never heard
and,
that one.
and it tracks the journey of when of the impact of Black people upon the White House, from the slaves that built it all the way up into Obama's time period, President Obama's time period, and the role that evangelicals and others played in it, even down to in Philadelphia, there's a section, even down to it covers Clarence Thomas, how he was groomed to become. It covers all of that time period. They call it grooming. The pastor that wrote the book. Um, and one of the things that stood out to me, and you asked about my journey, I'm bringing it back to my journey, is that I never, growing up, it took me being a 40-some-year-old, 50-some-year-old man to see how well places in my hometown were connected. Because I saw African Methodist Episcopal Church. I didn't know it was formed in Philadelphia when, in the 1800s, the late 1700s, the churches were integrated. Blacks and whites worshiped together, not just slaves, but free people worshiped together. And it was in Philadelphia that these four Black church leaders were challenged and escorted out of the church. And when they left, they formed AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Wow.
My wife and I have been privileged to visit the site of the oldest Black church in the United States in Williamsburg, Virginia. The actual landmark is there. Back to myself, has it impacted me? It's led me through that journey from small town to very conservative Jehovah's Witnesses to a non-denominational church now, where I've been part of two for the better part of the last couple of years, where the ministers, in many ways, speak to me not only as a person of color, but they speak to our community and do things in the community. So, and they're connected to other places outside entities I'm not gonna name, but within the community. So that as a individual, my journey, I'm in the best place I've ever been.
Mm,
But it hasn't, because I've been allowed to come to myself on this journey. If I stayed where I was at, we would not be having this conversation.
mm.
If I went back, if I had been reared in a small town, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But being able to get out of the small town, being able to engage with people across the spectrum, from hardcore conservative evangelicals to more free thinking liberal thinkers, as I call them, it's allowed me to have conversations with individuals such as yourself. What's your journey? What is it like? My journey is like now, I can respect what you believe. I may challenge it and question you on it. So I want a deeper understanding as to why you believe it. If you want to do it on a one-on-one conversation, I'll do it some podcasts perhaps like that. But for myself, yeah, I can get agitated when people ask me, "What's your?" 'Cause they don't. I freely share up here more so than I will on sometimes on one-on-one, face-to-face, unless I'm the one driving the conversation. Part of, I guess, the old man, hood man thing. Me ain't got to be the leader part. I don't know. Uh, but my journey now is I put Christianity in my links because I'm more liberal in my thought process. And that liberalness allows me to see other people as they are instead of saying, "Oh, I go to church so and so down the corner. If you'll come over here where I'm at, you're going to hell." I can't say that no more. You're welcome to come visit. You can come visit yours, but I'm not going to be sitting here convinced I'm going to go X, Y, Z because your pastor says this or he reads that from the scripture. That's where I stand in my Christian faith. The
Right.
ability to question, to analyze, to think, to look. And if it rubs someone the wrong way, I honestly say I don't really care if it does rub it the wrong way, because sometimes actually you think about it, fire is created by friction. And if you use the old school method of whip Boy Scouts, rub two sticks together, you get fire, whatever, or scratch the match. Fire comes about by some action. So if as a Christian believer, if I'm not, if I'm not showing my level of excitement for my faith, I can't expect you to become excited about it. My level of excitement is I'm free in it. I invite you to have that level of freedom in it to say I believe X, Y, Z, and yet be able to also to conform when necessary. Good. Like I go to church. Some people get up shouting, holding hands, running around, whatever. I'll sit there. I grew up in a church, old school Saint James Disciples Church, basically like the Baptist and old school Baptist in the South. You sit, you hear your sermon, and the whole that other part was not part of it. So then I spent 40 years as a witness, and you sit and you heard your sermon. So for me to get up, it's going to really have to touch my heart. Oh, they say the Spirit touch your heart. And it does sometimes, and I find myself up there on camera, and I'm like, "Oh Lord!" But that's how a long-winded answer to a short question.
Right, but that's culture. Depending on what community you're in, everybody develops their own little culture in that little space. And so
Mm.
you were raised in a certain culture, and then as you get exposed to other cultures, you've adapted and made little changes, and here you are today. You basically, through life experience, the information that you're taking in as you mature, then you've now kind of designed something that works for you based on your
Right.
life journey. And so we're constantly evolving, growing, and
Oh,
changing as we learn as humans. And I just hope that at the very least, on a human level, that we will be able to see we all bleed with the same blood, right?
mhm.
And the same blood comes out of us as if we get a cut. And all these mental narratives that separate us. I really do believe that we're stronger trying to collaborate, work together. There are always going to be differences. This world is so diverse. There's so many different peoples, different languages, different cultures, and ways of doing things. We're never going to be uniform, right?
Mm-mm.
Because even within one state of North Carolina, and I actually listened to that Tabitha Brown's personal story
Mhm.
where she talked about, when she moved to LA, it was so confusing to her because people would act like they liked her, but they really didn't like her. So she was so
Mhm.
confused. But in the South, she said in North Carolina, where she was from, because her name was Tabitha, people always thought she was white. And so she was treated differently
Mhm.
over the phone. But she said generally in the South, if somebody doesn't like you, they'll let you know right away.
They
And so
will let
you
you know.
know
They
it's
will
not
let you know.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's complex, but I think we need to still remain open to each other's
Mhm.
humanity and learning from each other. Movements of people across the globe has been happening since
The beginning of time, pretty much.
yeah,
Days
there
of
you go.
days of
And
Nimrod. Um, it's like that's where I kind of overwhelm people sometimes. It's like it took my 40 some years of studying and readership the way I did with the non biblical references that I covered often. Because I'm like more of a historian kind. I love history. To just find out while we're reading the Bible about the story of Noah and the Ark, the Native Americans are telling the story, same story of 9 survivors of a great flood.
Interesting.
The stories are incorporated in all the cultures, but because of the way the educational system was done here in the South, I've heard in northern schools you got a little bit more opportunity to learn a little bit differently. And where I grew up at, you didn't get those things. I got them as an adult. And through my own studies, I came to discover, oh wow, so we have Noah and the Ark. The Native Americans had 9 survivors of a great flood. The same story. But it
Hmm.
all kind of made sense when it went back to the Tower of Babel in the Bible, when all the languages and people were scattered around the earth, they took with them their stories. If you accept it as factual, and it only makes sense that the stories traveled. Going a
Right.
little bit deeper than we should on this podcast here. Let's get back to the point. uh,
No, but I'm
so,
learning from you. I'm learning from you because I was sharing with someone earlier today that I think something that I would want to leave with our audience is I think a lot of times people take the perspective that when immigrants come in, we may appear that we're kind of oblivious to the African American experience. And particularly, I always point out in my latest book called Decoding America, I talk about my own personal journey, learning about what slavery was like in the US and particularly from you guys sharing it because otherwise we wouldn't have known. We weren't
right.
taught about American history in the Caribbean.
Again, we weren't, when I was growing up, in a small town, like I said, it wasn't that many years. As an adult, I learned it was that far out from immigration. I remember as a kid, you don't pay that much attention to things, I guess, in a small town. But it was very limited what was actually taught about slavery and things of that sort. We just kind of lived it. I had to learn it more with the experiences as an
Mhm.
adult. And there are people who are alive now in their 80s, 90s, and 100s who lived that out as an experience. Wow, I'm watching the Facebook comment. Someone right here. Yeah, this guy's one of these. I don't know if it's real or not. I'm not gonna respond to his comment, but
Okay,
yeah,
Samuel McKitty.
yeah, but he's got it up there like,
It's
yeah,
somewhat naive for people to believe that having unrestricted
yeah.
immigration would not have an
And we
adverse
don't even talk about that.
impact on you. Yeah, no, I'm definitely not even touching that because it's a very complicated,
Yeah,
complex issue, and the U.S. does have a right as a sovereign government to decide who comes in and who doesn't. Every country does, and so I'm not touching that.
right.
I'm basically
But
sharing about my own experience as an immigrant American from
mhm,
another
mhm.
place and other
But
people that
see,
I
the thing
interview
is
on the
though,
podcast.
in this climate, anyone who's an immigrant is a subject for is a target, whether they're legal or not illegal, because they're not. The bullet point is not whether you're legal or not. The bullet point, and I would say it, is that you're not white.
Interesting. Okay.
You're not
And I
white,
think it's a learning journey for those
and
of us who are in the African
right,
diaspora
that's smart.
community
Right, yeah,
because a lot of times we don't get that nuance because we don't
right,
understand it. We've
yeah.
never
That's
been in such a large country where there's so
this.
many different groups and all of the social issues that
Mhm.
arise in the conversation over generations. I mean, I'm learning by listening to African Americans who are basically explaining the nuances of certain things because honestly I don't get them. I
Well,
so I'm constantly on a learning journey. So we're definitely not saying that we're not
no, we're
touching
not.
whether illegal or
No, but
illegal.
I'm gonna go
We're
back.
not
I'm
touching
gonna drive
that.
home. I'm gonna drive home this one thing though that I've been sharing as often as possible, and people can look it up. Now, no, I'm not, I could add it to the comments, but I'm not. That all the denaturalization laws they're trying to change and this things, who's a citizen, who's not. Birthright citizenship. That's the word for it. Birthright citizenship is attached to the 14th Amendment. I've shared it with so many people of color, African American people, that we are not legally citizens ourselves without that 14th Amendment through the Constitution. Take that away, we become illegal immigrants in this country. That 14th Amendment gave us a measure of citizenship. They think it's about everyone else. It's about us as well. That amendment could be ever be repealed or modified. We would go back to being able to be classified as slaves, indentured servants, whatever. That protects us. We just happen to have 2 or 3 generations going back. Like my grandmother was a descendant of the slaves. Okay, she came out of slavery. But that 14th Amendment is the only one protecting us. This great Memorial Day we just celebrated is attached to us. It says all soldiers know it's not. The first Memorial Day celebration, one of the first ones happened in South Carolina. The Union black soldiers held a memorial for their Union dead. And it was their Memorial Day. The United
I
States
didn't
government
know
put up on
that.
it.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I saw that
And
someone shared it
yeah,
online on LinkedIn. I did
yeah,
not know that. Yeah.
yeah. And in Texas, they did likewise. Even in Texas, after the Emancipation Proclamation, giving us Juneteenth, which is coming up, they were still enslaved for 2 years after slavery was abolished because Texas didn't tell them that you were free.
Hmm.
So when it goes back, leads back up to the 14th Amendment, that's the only thing protecting any of us who are not of European descent from being pushed back into another category legally. And that's the sad part. But so yeah. So and that's the whole thing. I see these people, they can say what they want to say. Um, because I know where they're coming from. And they're right to their opinion. I can respect their opinion. But when it comes to that part, no one seems to realize that it's slowly creeping over beyond that. Beyond that. And that's a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, it is.
Beyond that.
It is. And it's a very sensitive
Because
issue. I'm definitely not the person who's going to
no,
be
that's why
sharing any
that's why
sort of
that's why
polarizing conversation.
no,
No, I'm not even.
no, that's
That's not what we
no.
do on our podcast. It's too
Yeah, that's
polarizing, and
right.
we're focusing on humans interacting with humans. What are our experiences? How are we experiencing each other? What can we learn from each
And
other?
and
And
that
how do
takes
we
away all the
share the
negativity. Yeah, that
right?
takes away the negativity. Yeah.
And that
Um,
shares like what are the struggles we're having, what are the triumphs that we're having, positive influences that we're making on the society.
yeah,
That's what I'm here to cover. I'm
yeah,
not here
yeah.
to
You coming in here is great because I have another guest coming on Wednesday, Scott Grace. His whole podcast, his whole journey as a white person has been to find that peaceful space in this whole racial dynamic, in this whole political dynamic. And I almost didn't bring him on, but he's like, I have an amazing story. Share me part of the story. How he uses storytelling to communicate the love and unity we need instead of the divisiveness we need. He'll be on
right,
Wednesday, and he's
right,
gonna come up here Wednesday. And it's gonna be interesting because I'm like, uh, how do you do this? I've been around storytellers, but he's using it to answer all of what they're saying, to respond to all of what they're saying.
right,
A match where we connected. He told me, he shared with me how while on a plane he was sitting across from Megas. They made sure they were Mega. They made a plane they were Megas, but he started talking about their child and how the child was loving kids are. And before it's all over, the same people who would normally not speak to him and have a conversation with him, they were having a conversation about an innocent child. And that's
yes,
part of what he's going to do when he comes here Wednesday to speak to the audience about how to bridge that gap through some kindness, through some neutral dialogue. So I would love some of these people to come back. Y'all are welcome back, Mackie Samuels. Come on back every Wednesday. Let Scott Gray speak to you because he's one of these individuals that don't mind going that well with his storytelling. Um,
right,
Going back to
right,
our guest today, Simone. Since we are talking about that experience, we sharing each other experiences. I'm gonna address what he said about taking care of our own. My own, sir, is anyone who's walking, living, breathing. We are all humans. That's why I said we should all be our brother's keepers. It's not for the government to do it. Before the government had resources and structures in place, people took care of their communities. Didn't care whether you're black, white, blue, or green. I grew up in a small town. I don't recall anyone ever going hungry because you were black, blue, or green in my hometown growing up. We were a small town of people. Yes, the hatred was there, the divisiveness there, the racism was there, but we still looked out for each other when disasters came. When hurricanes came, we looked out for each other. When weather came, we looked out for each other. The human experience, immigration is a human experience. All of us are immigrants in America. All of us. Not because what the government says. We all are here. And I'm gonna get off my soapbox because I'm like feeling that thing that we all are people.
Yes, yeah. And you know what,
I'm
Ned?
gonna let you close this out, Simone, so we can get doing this other thing. I did 40 minutes this hour. You've been an amazing guest. I went for an hour for the first time with you. It's a good thing.
Because it's a very intriguing topic. It's a very intriguing topic. I wanted to share one last thing I was going to
Yeah.
say
Hmm.
that I was yeah, I was making a point earlier, but I think I didn't get to finish it about how
Hmm.
sometimes immigrants might seem oblivious to
Hmm.
the experience of other people here. And it's because we're uneducated. And so we have to really be open to reading, really go on a research and talk to people and share. We can't just, stay on the opposite side and don't interact because, if we don't share information with each other, not all of us lose, right? So,
Hmm.
um, but I went to West Africa, Sierra Leone, and I remember coming across a community where you had Christians and Muslims living in the same little part of town, right next door to each
Wow.
other. One Christian
Wow.
family, and they all knew that the neighbor was Muslim and the other one was Christian. But yet, you would not believe how these people just got along and lived and shared resources with each other. um and that made such an impact on me because before that, the perspective I had from just watching the media is that Christians and Muslim were just hostile towards each other if you just watch
Hmm.
the news bites
Hmm.
that are put out there. And so
Hmm.
that made such an influence on me as an intern being studying abroad, to see these people who know that each other is on the opposite side of the religious perspective, but
Hmm.
yet they get along and they share resources and they live in this community on a human level. So people can have different ways of thinking or different ways of viewing things. Our life experiences are different. We come from different cultures. However, I'm not going to harm you because you simply have a different view. If you have a phone and you turn it
Hmm.
this side, you have a different view. If you turn it this side,
Hmm.
there's a different view. So based on where you're sitting at any different angle of a perspective, you're going to see something different. And I so we just really have to just deal with each other human to human. And at the end of the day, when all of us we all leave here either in a coffin or we disintegrate and we go back to whatever belief system you think, wherever you think you're going back to, we
Hmm.
all disintegrate after they put us in that ground. So I'm all about building bridges across the globe with different people. I listen and I open my heart to hear people's journeys and experiences of this world and how we can build bridges and understanding. So that's my goal, right?
Thank you so much. Um, Shortly thereafter, this podcast ends. I will send you. You already have the YouTube link. Um, with- I'll send you the other couple links so you can share it with your audience however you see fit. I thank you for your insightfulness. Thank you for your courage to speak. I thank you for the insight, the words you shared to help me to think differently. Um, I say this on behalf of all the subscribers, followers, but life is about more than living the podcast. We appreciate you. I don't even know these people, but I know it's gonna make an impact on people. So I'm gonna say
Yes.
thank you on their behalf. And you have an amazing week, an amazing weekend, and I may come back to you again for round two because
Yeah,
you
let's keep the conversation going.
uh,
Let's get
and
feedback from people and keep the
yeah, you
conversation
give me
going.
keep the conversation going, and I don't know where we'll go with it next time, but this has been very enjoyable. So thank you again. Have an amazing week. I'm going to hit the end live stream button, and peace and blessings to you and your whole household.
Same to you,
All right.
Alfred.
You're welcome. Bye.